BARK Radio.
What's good, everybody? It's Robo from All Bark back on the video, and today we're getting my college football Week 5 picks. This is one of the biggest weeks of the year slate-wise, with a ton of loaded top 25 games and some other sneaky good ones around the country as well. But before we get into these picks, let's go ahead and dive into the Week 4 recap. Week 4 got off to a nightmare start, but overall was a great week with a strong Saturday for the picks. I went 28-22 against the spread after dropping every weeknight game and finished with a good record picking winners despite an unbelievably bad start with some big upsets early on. So the yearly record continues to improve as we learn more about these teams, which is the number one goal. So with that said, let's dive into an absolutely loaded Week 5, starting with Thursday night. Army at East Carolina is our first game of the week Thursday night, and it should be a pretty solid game. With the Pirates, the offense is very solid with one of the best passing attacks in the American so far this season. And on the other end, the defensive line has been really working so far, giving up under 90 rushing yards a game, which could be huge in this game. I'm still not a believer in Army, but they average 300 rushing yards a game, and if they get it rolling, they definitely have a shot in this one. They battled all the way back down from 3 scores against North Texas before losing in overtime last week. But I just like ECU's advantages on both sides of the ball here statistically, so I'll roll with ECU at home, 28-20. The first of 3 games Friday is number 8 Florida State on the road at Virginia. This could be a very competitive game despite how good the Seminoles have looked this season. Virginia has great skill players, a solid quarterback in Chandler Morris, and could absolutely hang in this game under the lights at home considering it's a look-ahead spot for Florida State as they take on Miami next week. However, this line almost feels like Vegas knows that, and Florida State has shown more than enough offensive ability to take this game on the road without much of a sweat. I don't love Virginia's defense being able to get the stops they need to pull off an upset, but Virginia does have a good amount of tape on Florida State now and should be amped up and scoring some points. So I think Florida State gets a battle, but are ultimately too good to drop this one. I'll go 31-27 Noles. Next is Arizona State hosting number 24 TCU. I really like this TCU team. Bud Clark and that defense did a pretty solid job slowing down Kevin Jennings and SMU's offense last week outside of some big plays. But Arizona State is a really good team. We saw last week how they performed at Baylor with their backs against the wall. They can't afford to drop games after that Mississippi State loss, so I know that they'll come to play. I think it's definitely a coin flip game I wouldn't love to bet on, but I can't wait to watch. Josh Hoover is such a good quarterback for TCU with great weapons that'll show up on the road, but I'm taking Sam Leavitt and Arizona State at home to get this one done, 34-28. Our last Friday night matchup is Houston at Oregon State. Oregon State has looked absolutely awful so far this season, dropping games to Fresno State and getting blown out by Oregon, Cal, and Texas Tech. And on the flip side, although I don't think Houston's talent level is all that great, the defense has been pretty solid this season, and Connor Wegman has been pretty sharp as both a passer and a runner. Willie Fritz is a very good coach. You can trust his team to show up on the road typically. So even though I'm not going to expect a blowout here, give me Houston to take this one with some disciplined football. Probably by 1 or 2 possessions. I'll go with a 30-21 final. Georgia Tech will look to stay undefeated this week as they take on Wake Forest on the road. Wake Forest can definitely run the football, but Robbie Ashford is so unreliable at quarterback. Georgia Tech should absolutely win this game, and maybe in dominant fashion. They honestly should have covered against Temple last week in a clear hangover spot, and now enter a pretty easy stretch of their schedule. I really just don't see Wake Forest getting stops on Haynes King and this Tech offense. They couldn't stop NC State, and although it's a different style offense, it'll be a similar story. So give me Georgia Tech by 3 scores here, 38-20. USC at Illinois is a big ranked matchup this week in the Big Ten. USC's offense is missing Jacoby Lane, but still look pretty sharp against a bad Michigan State team without him. And Illinois' offensive line is really struggling, and they have some defensive injuries that were part of the reason they got demolished by Indiana. But with that said, teams coming off of absolute embarrassment typically do look stronger the following week. Almost sort of a wake-up call that you are not close to who you thought you were. And USC's defense showed last week that they can be scored on fairly consistently. Luke Altmaier still has not shown up to a big game yet, but at home, I expect Illinois to bounce back around him and challenge USC. But I just have a lot more faith in Jayden Maiava when it matters, so give me USC 31-27. Notre Dame is on the road this week at Arkansas, who's coming off a bad loss on the road at Memphis. First with Notre Dame, that offense absolutely worked Purdue. CJ Carr looks good, and the running game with Love and Price is one of the best in the country. They still have some issues defensively, though. That could help Arkansas here, as that offense is really potent. But that Memphis game was an epic collapse, and now they have to get up to play a team that's incredibly battle-tested and finally hitting their stride, it seems. I'm expecting Arkansas to score, but Notre Dame's offense should go off and win this game by at least a touchdown. I've got a 38-31 final. Rutgers had an epic special teams failure last week at home that completely cost them that game to Iowa. A kick return touchdown to open the game spotted Iowa 7 points, and then multiple missed field goals swung all the momentum to Iowa, who took advantage and came through in the end. Now they've got to go on the road this week to a Minnesota team who's got 2 weeks of prep following a road loss to Cal. I don't see much of a reason to bet against the Gophers in this spot besides some potential injuries to the running backs. So give me a well-rested Minnesota team and a good bounce-back spot here, 34-24. Syracuse just pulled off a huge upset on the road at Clemson last week, but in the process of that game, quarterback Steve Angeli went down with a serious injury, which makes Syracuse offense incredibly vulnerable here. I really like Fran Brown and what he's building there, but it was obvious Ricky Collins was not moving the offense the way Angeli was last week, although in a small sample and short notice. And with that unknown, it's really hard to side with this Cuse offense keeping up with Duke, who really got rolling last week against NC State. So give me Duke to take advantage of that opportunity here, 31-21. Louisville at Pitt could be a great game in the ACC this week. Isaac Brown's absolutely incredible, and this Louisville offense has playmakers all over. But Pitt has a solid defense, especially the linebackers and run stuffers, who can make an impact by slowing him down as much as they can to limit what Louisville can do on the road. Miller Moss does have the arm to challenge them, but he's a risk taker who's had turnover issues. And on the other side, I just don't think Louisville's defense is trustworthy at all in slowing down Pitt enough to run away with this one, especially in a tough environment. So give me Pitt to keep it close and maybe even flirt with an upset, but Louisville will survive on the road, 35-31. Kansas and Cincinnati are very comparable teams to me, both neck and neck in my current Big 12 rankings, with Kansas having a slight edge overall. And I like both quarterbacks' ability to make plays throughout the game to give their team a shot. Kansas has a really good rushing attack with Highshaw and Daniels, but Cincinnati's defensive line is really good as well, and I don't really like this Kansas passing game. The receivers don't do much at all, and it makes them pretty one-dimensional. Cincinnati's had 2 weeks of prep for this one, and it's already played a similar talented team with Nebraska. So although I think Kansas does have the upper hand and is playing at home, I'm going to rock with Cincinnati to keep it close and cover on the road, 30-27. UCF is playing pretty good football the past 2 games and just smoked North Carolina last week. This week they'll take on a Kansas State team that has looked absolutely awful this season, but are coming off of much needed bye week. This is a tough matchup to call as both teams are still extremely unreliable. I don't know if Kansas State is truly as bad as they've played, and if UCF is as good as they've looked against terrible teams either. So I've got to ride with UCF on the spread considering what we've seen, but I assume this will be a back and forth game that Kansas State desperately needs, and that bye week might be enough to help them get back in the win column. So I'm going to take K-State by just a field goal, 27-24. The North Texas-South Alabama point total is way up into the 60s for good reason. North Texas is putting up incredible offensive numbers and has played way better at home, honestly, this season, but also took a huge lead over Army quickly last week before allowing them to creep back in. South Alabama just got blown out at home by a bad Coastal Carolina team that hasn't scored all season. Despite trusting South Alabama's offense, I just can't get there under 2 touchdowns, seeing how easy North Texas is scoring this season, and knowing how bad South Alabama's defense is, especially with the home to away difference with the North Texas defense so far. I think they take this game without much of a sweat, 37-20. This Ohio Bowling Green spread feels a little weird. I would assume with how Ohio played this year against Rutgers, West Virginia, and even Ohio State, they'd be favored by much more than 10. But that Gardner-Webb game gave me some serious pause, and Vegas has to know something here. Bowling Green has also consistently covered spreads this season, hanging around in games against far superior teams. So this is really going to be a tough call. But I'm going to trust Parker Navarro's playmaking ability and experience at home in a conference matchup to pull away eventually, especially with the way they can run the football. 31-17. Vanderbilt looks like an absolute buzzsaw right now and just dropped 70 on Georgia State in a revenge spot. This week they're going to host Utah State, who looks like a pretty quality Group of 5 team. Bryson Barnes is playing great, and they absolutely smashed Air Force a couple weeks ago, who just competed with Boise State until the final last week. This is not going to be a super easy game for Vanderbilt most likely, but with the way they look right now, it's so hard to not see them putting up 40 plus again. So it comes down to Utah State being able to put up some points themselves, and seeing how they did score against Texas A&M, I'll take them to compete here as well. 41-24 final for Vandy. Central Michigan's at home taking on in-state conference rival Eastern Michigan. This is a battle of 2 very bad MAC teams. Central is built very similar to Louisiana, who Eastern Michigan just beat last week, but I think their offensive line is a bit better than Louisiana's, and they're built for that run game, where Louisiana just has solid options there and can't really throw it, and Eastern really didn't stop them from running whatsoever despite that, so I don't see how Central gets stopped very often here unless there's unforced turnovers, and playing at home here is a decent advantage. so give me the Chips by a score, 27-20. JMU and Georgia Southern could be a decent game this week. Georgia Southern is not a bad team at all, but James Madison is a great Group of 5 team and should definitely win this game. But I wasn't overly impressed with how they played against Liberty. They took a while to pull away from that game, and Georgia Southern is 20 or so spots higher ranked for me than Liberty in the Group of 5, and I think 3 scores may be a bit too much for this game. Georgia Southern's offense can flat out score, and the strength of their defense is the secondary, who can make some plays to stay competitive in this game. But ultimately, James Madison is the better team and better up front, so give me the Dukes by 14, 38-24. Arkansas State at ULM is a real toss-up game this week. ULM is so well coached, and that showed up as they really took it to UTEP last week early on. Arkansas State has great playmakers and a good quarterback, but that offensive line really struggled last week in the Kennesaw State loss. They got put in a big hole and nearly were able to escape it and tie the game, but fell short on the road. This one's going to come down to how they respond against about a similar level team that looks a lot stronger defensively. But I think this could be a solid buy a low spot for Arkansas State, where they just show up stronger in this game. I'll take them on the road to bounce back, 27-23. Ohio State at Washington is a sneaky good game. The Ohio State defense is incredible, but nobody believes in this Washington team for some reason, as they got 0 AP poll votes despite an undefeated record. Washington has elite cornerback play, an elite wide receiver in Denzel Boston, a top 5 running back in college football in Jonah Coleman, and a monster dual threat quarterback in Damon Williams that I really believe in. This is the game we see if Washington really is a spoiler threat in the Big Ten. I think they have a shot if they slow down Ohio State's offense enough. It has looked stoppable before in both the Texas and Ohio games, but 2 weeks of prep is very valuable for Ryan Day, which makes this a game I really wouldn't want to touch personally. I could see Ohio State's defense suffocating, as well as Washington punching early and forcing the Buckeyes to respond. So I'll go with my gut and take Ohio State by just 7, 31-24. LSU at Ole Miss is another tough game to pick. Garrett Nussmeier may still be slightly banged up, and the LSU offense has definitely been bad at times this season. But last week was a great tune-up, and that defense is flat out elite. On the other side, Austin Simmons is still banged up, but Trinidad Chambliss stepped in for Simmons and is playing out of his mind right now, just dominating Arkansas and Tulane. But this is a much tougher defense than both of those teams. Arkansas and Tulane just flat out do not have the athletes in the defensive line that LSU does. And if they get after Chambliss, can prevent him from scrambling, that secondary can make his first major start super tough. I'll go with the more experienced team and better defense showing up on the road, 27-24. Texas A&M hosts Auburn this week. A&M is a very strong team to me and right now sits very close to my top 5. That offensive line and defensive line are 2 of the best units in the entire country and can absolutely control this game over a very solid Auburn team who's good in the trenches too. I think Auburn should still be ranked, but having to go play at A&M right after a dogfight with Oklahoma is just a really tough scenario to be in, especially when A&M had 2 weeks of prep for this specific matchup, and Arnold definitely took that Oklahoma loss pretty hard. I really like what we've seen out of Marcel Reed and the A&M receivers so far as well, so give me the Aggies here, 31-20. Indiana just absolutely obliterated Illinois last week. They're a legitimate contender in the Big Ten, just a very fundamentally sound football team, and Fernando Mendoza has established himself as a potential Heisman candidate now with a 14-0 touchdown to interception ratio. They hit the road at Iowa this week. Iowa is still not a good football team to me for Big Ten standards. That Rutgers game was a complete meltdown by the Knights. Kick return touchdown, 2 missed field goals, and several missed opportunities to put that game away allowed Iowa to take the lead and extend it. I just cannot buy Iowa here in this spot, knowing that defense is not really dominant, and Indiana is miles and miles ahead of Rutgers in both talent and fundamental football. I've got Curt Cignetti's Hoosiers showing up on the road here, 34-20. UCLA at Northwestern is a disgusting game in the Big Ten this week. Preston Stone's a turnover machine for Northwestern. He's fumbling everything and has 6 picks already, so it's very hard to ride with him as a favorite over a touchdown. UCLA is one of the worst teams in the Power 5, but coming off of a blowout loss to New Mexico and a head coach firing, I can see them coming into this game fired up off the bye to right the ship a little bit, knowing it's a weaker opponent again, and they do have some new leadership. A loss here to Northwestern, and that entire season continues to spiral downhill for the Bruins. So I'll trust a slight bounce back and buy a low spot with UCLA plus 6.5 here, but I can't take them to win the game on the road, 24-21 Northwestern. Cal at Boston College is another disgusting looking game this week after seeing those 2 teams' previous games. Both sides showed some promise in the earlier weeks and then laid absolute eggs against Stanford and San Diego State. We've seen some good and some really bad play out of Dylan Lonergan in Boston College, and with Jaren Kiave Sangapula-Tele, there's been a few freshman moments, but much more consistent ball placement and star flashes. Just not much around him helping him out. In a game as ugly as this with two clearly untrustworthy teams, I'm going to ride with JKS and Cal getting back to what helped them beat Minnesota 2 weeks ago, picking up the road upset over Boston College, 24-23. Baylor looks to bounce back this week in a big way on the road at Oklahoma State. The Cowboys just got embarrassed by Tulsa at home and fired Mike Gundy as a result. And with all respect to Tulsa, that's a disgusting loss for a Power 5 program, and now they got to turn around and host a Baylor team who absolutely cannot afford another loss. Sawyer Robertson can still be a Heisman candidate with his numbers so far, and I think he's going to add to him here yet again. Give me Baylor big, 42-17. Utah at West Virginia might be a similar type of game as Baylor-Oklahoma State, just not as ugly as I've got more respect for this Mountaineer team at home than the Cowboys. But the West Virginia trench play is pretty rough. Kansas whooped them at will on the ground and didn't even use their receivers. Utah has a great running game, and that offensive line should bounce back in a big way. Texas Tech is for real, and I'm not going to overly knock on Utah for that loss. Devin Dampier's passing does worry me a bit against tougher opponents, but Utah should be able to run all day in this game. I've got the Utes by 2 scores, 31-17. Buffalo and UConn are both going through rough patches right now. Buffalo nearly lost to Kent State and then got backdoored last week and actually lost outright to Troy after handling that game almost the entire way. And right now, UConn's defense is really bad. They lost to Delaware and then barely beat a very bad Ball State team at home. Lucky for them though, Buffalo can't really throw the ball efficiently and definitely needs to get back to just running the football. Until Buffalo proves again that they can run it at will, I like their unders because the defense is a decent unit. But UConn's defense is not looking good right now, and I'm still expecting Buffalo to get things going again. So I'm going to roll with the Bulls at home as underdogs here outright, 24-21. San Diego State just completely blanked Cal last week, which was incredibly surprising considering how well Cal was playing prior. And seeing San Diego State's performance against Washington State, they'll go on the road this week at Northern Illinois. The Husky offense is not good, which definitely plays into San Diego State's hands as their defense has played really well outside of that one game so far. Northern Illinois' defense is fairly stout as well, but seeing how Sean Lewis's Aztecs move the ball against Cal, I gotta believe in them to do it again on the road here too. So give me San Diego State by about a score, 23-17. Rice was pretty impressive last week. They knocked out Charlotte's quarterback early, and that game was over fast. But Navy this week should be a really tough game. They'll be ready to slow down that rushing attack led by Jackson and Jenkins as they see a better one in practice every day. It's the Service Academy's bread and butter. Navy's defense has not been good at all though, so Rice will still find ways to score in this game, and the Rice defense should come to play a bit. I just expect Navy to win this one with a better offense playing at home as well. So I've got Navy by a 31-20 final. Toledo's offense was so disappointing last week and was the number one reason they dropped a road game to Western Michigan in the final moments. The Rockets defense is very good, but that offense just cannot score points at times, so the under is probably a good play for a lot of Toledo matchups. But Ben Finley and Akron have gotten going a bit against UAB and Duquesne. That Toledo defense is so much stronger than those two teams though. I just don't know how much we can trust Toledo to score a big number in conference play to cover a spread of 3 touchdowns, even up against Akron's defense. So I'll take Akron to cover, but the Rockets will win this one, 30-13. New Mexico hosts New Mexico State this week, and to keep it simple, this New Mexico team looks pretty good outside of one game. They hung with Michigan and absolutely torched UCLA. This is a rivalry game which could make things interesting. I just think the coaching staff difference is massive in this game. I'm a big believer in Jason Eck. New Mexico State could easily get blown out, but coming off of that big UCLA win, I wonder if New Mexico will have too much confidence entering this game, especially with the whole country expecting dominance. I definitely think they'll win though, and having a bye week to refocus is pretty huge for that factor. So give me the Lobos here, 41-20. Tulane just got demolished by Ole Miss last week, but that might make this a buy low spot here on the road at Tulsa, coming off their road upset at Oklahoma State. It's a flip-flop type of spot here with one team coming off a blowout loss and the other coming off a big win. And Tulane has proven themselves already this season with the Duke and Northwestern blowouts. And they are built to dominate Group of 5 programs like Tulsa. I do have to say Trey Lamb looks like a great coach for Tulsa and definitely has them looking upwards. But the depth and trench play Tulane has built is just too much to me, and they aren't going to go through crisis like Oklahoma State was. I'm taking Tulane in this one, 38-21. Hawaii is on the road at Air Force this week, and despite not covering, I was impressed by the Falcons against Boise State last week. That run game is real, per usual for Air Force. They hung in that game for a long time, and I don't think many teams are going to shut down that this season. On the other side, the Air Force D-line is very solid, but I do believe Hawaii is going to score in this game through the air. Hawaii's offense really relies on the passing game, and Air Force has been lit up through the air, allowing the second most yards in the Mountain West right now. And Hawaii has had success as a run defense this year, but it hasn't faced a triple option attack yet, especially on the road. So I'll take Air Force close, 27-24. Number 15, Tennessee is at Mississippi State this week, and it could be a potential popular upset pick as Mississippi State has already knocked off Arizona State this year. But I feel like this is a tougher matchup for them, and the Bulldogs have been overachieving a bit so far. Tennessee is a very, very good team. We saw that against Georgia, and they should come out hungry looking to get back in the win column in SEC play. I've got respect for the Mississippi State secondary, but I don't really see Joey Aguilar struggling enough here for an upset. And that Tennessee defense should have a pretty strong day. Boo Carter looks like a potential breakout star to me. I've got Tennessee covering here, 34-23. Over to the Conference USA, Kennesaw State hosts 1-3 Middle Tennessee State. Kennesaw has a pretty solid offensive and defensive line. They really handled Arkansas State early on and built a 3-score lead that was too much for Arkansas State to come back from. And like I've said, Middle Tennessee really struggled to stop dual threat quarterbacks, which Kennesaw State does have in Amari Odom. And on top of that, the Owls defense has really been fantastic outside of the Indiana game this season, giving up just 10 to Wake Forest and 21 to Arkansas State, who both have way better offenses than the Blue Raiders. So I think Kennesaw takes this game by double digits, 31-21. Old Dominion is another very good Group of 5 team. They just demolished Virginia Tech 2 weeks ago, and now come off a bye week to host Liberty, who has been playing like garbage so far, but hung around with James Madison for a while before allowing a late cover, which does play in our favor, betting in a sell high, buy low spot here and near 17 points. Liberty could definitely continue to struggle, and I don't see them winning this game at all, but I saw enough improvement defensively in the first 3 quarters so in that James Madison game to assume they can do it up against Old Dominion too, but Colton Joseph's going to have his way eventually. So I've got ODU by 2 scores, 34-20. Arizona at number 14 Iowa State could be an interesting game in the Big 12. Iowa State's definitely a bit overrated to me. The offensive weapons aren't great, and the offense hasn't looked sharp against any competition besides South Dakota, really. And Arizona has looked really competitive so far, knocking off Kansas State and blowing out their other 2 matchups. Noah Fafita has proven he can make plays in the past, and they've got a very strong running game that could score some points here. Coming off of byes, I expect both teams to play well, and this would be a fairly competitive game. But Rocco Becht is pretty trustworthy in the clutch, as are his tight ends. So I'll go with the Cyclones close, 28-24. Over to Virginia Tech at NC State. The Wolfpack defense is flat out awful. They had that Duke game in hand early, up a ton in the first half, and then collapsed unbelievably fast, letting them take the lead before half even ended. Then in the second half, it was just back and forth offense from both sides. CJ Bailey didn't have his best night, but Duke could not be stopped at all. Virginia Tech's offense has been unbearably bad, but this is a genuine bounce back spot with Brent Pry fired, maybe sparking some momentum into the Hokies. With that said, this NC State offense should be scoring at will, and I know CJ Bailey can play better, especially under the lights at home. I've got NC State 38-24. Jacksonville State at Southern Miss is a complete toss-up to me. I have a lot of trust in Braylon Braxton and Southern Miss's offense playing at home against a fairly stout defense in the Conference USA and Jacksonville State. But these games are often coverable or upsets for Jacksonville State because of the low-scoring nature usually. The Gamecocks can run the football, and the defense consistently holds opponents out of the end zone. I just can't get there to pick the upset with Gavin Wimsatt at quarterback for Jacksonville State. But I respect their program enough to know it's possible, and I think it'll come down to a field goal regardless of side, and I do love the Southern Miss offense like I said. So give me them at home to survive by 3, 31-28. Western Kentucky didn't play very well last week against Nevada, but I'm not too worried about that performance as a whole, and this week, although it's on the road, Missouri State is just not a very good football team. They look to be improving, but I still think they're about the same level as Nevada was, and this spread sits just over a field goal. I feel pretty comfortable rocking with Matthew Henry and Maverick McIver to get this one done on the road. That offense should be cooking and helping Western Kentucky win by double digits unless they just play super flat and the defense is getting fried. So I'll go 38-27 for a final. Memphis is on the road at FAU Saturday night, and Memphis has so much to play for right now after that Arkansas win, fighting for a playoff spot as they're heavily in that Group of 5 conversation. FAU just looks like a bad football team. They lost to FIU by double digits 2 weeks ago and had a bye week last week, so not a ton of data points to go off of. But even so, Memphis has the players on both sides of the ball to dominate this game. Sure, it could be a hangover spot, but I just don't see FAU having much success defensively here at all. Memphis should score on the majority of their drives and put this one away eventually. I'll take Memphis by 3 scores, 41-23. On to the biggest game of the week, Oregon at Penn State. It's another chance for James Franklin to show up in a big game in the regular season, as for Drew Aller as well, who just doesn't really move the needle for me. I do think these are 2 of the top 5 teams in the country, but Oregon and Dante Moore just look like the better offense, and honestly, I love what Oregon's got defensively too. They have playmakers to take the ball away from Drew Aller if he airs it out, and if they stick to that screen game as they usually do, Oregon can shut that down too. Dante Moore has just been a stud this season for the Ducks. This is his first big test though, so I don't love betting this game, but if I had to pick a side, I'd ride with Dan Lanning and the Ducks. James Franklin's record in big games is just way too rough to ride with. I like the Ducks here close, 30-27. Now on to another huge game in the SEC, number 17 Alabama at number 5 Georgia. I think this is going to be an incredible game. Both of these offensive and playmakers, and the last few games between these teams have been really fun. Alabama looks to be hitting their stride, and both teams are coming off bye weeks with a ton of prep. I expect that to end up positive for the offenses with scripted plays, and I think Bama's offensive line is playing better. As for the whole team since the Florida State game, but Georgia proved they're a contender by beating Tennessee on the road, and the O-line did look better in that game as well. This is an obvious revenge spot, and this building is going to be rocking at night, so I'm going to take Georgia by a score, 31-24. Missouri gets a cupcake game this week against UMass after taking the dub against Lenora Sellers in South Carolina a week ago. And obviously, as the spread shows, the Tigers should absolutely work UMass in this game. UMass has a case for worst team in the FBS this year. They look flat out terrible on both sides of the ball and even let Iowa score 47. Missouri has been put up some gaudy numbers this season against bad teams, and it's not really a look-ahead spot either, as they've got a bye before Alabama in 2 weeks. So I really don't mind anything under 50 with them here, honestly. I think Missouri goes off in this game, 55-7. Washington State at Colorado State's another weird game. This Washington State team is pretty confusing, honestly. They looked awful against Idaho week 1, and then turned around and destroyed San Diego State in week 2, just to get obliterated by North Texas in week 3, and then score 24 in the Apple Cup against Washington. They do look better with Zevi Eckhoff to me, though, and on the other side of this game, Colorado State has an offense issue. They shuffled quarterbacks last week trying things out, but they competed at home against a quality UTSA team defensively. But the way they lost that game was crushing, and I could see Washington State coming on the road and stealing this one as underdogs against a dejected offense. I'll take Washington State close, 31-28. Stanford and San Jose State is an ugly game. San Jose State has looked really bad this year. Walker Egan struggled. They lost a home game to a bad Central Michigan team, struggled to beat Idaho, and they cannot stop the run at all. Stanford fits a lot of that as well as one of the worst teams in the Power 5, but they beat Boston College 2 weeks ago at home and scored 20 on the road at Virginia last week. This is a super ugly game between two bad teams, but Stanford has looked decent in their one home game so far. So I'll ride with them at home over San Jose State with such a small spread to cover as well, 28-23. Boise State is back home Saturday night taking on Appalachian State. App State can move the football through the air with A.J. Swan, and Air Force just had a ton of success rushing the football against Boise's defense last week. Quite frankly, Boise's defense does not look good enough on either side to slow down App State's offense enough to be over 3-score favorites in my opinion, especially if they allow App State to also run the football. Boise is definitely going to score themselves, and score a lot probably, but both teams are going to have offensive success here with struggling defenses, which could allow App State to keep it close enough to cover. There is a clear gap between these teams though, and Dylan Riley should go off again. Give me Boise, 38-24. South Carolina needs to win badly this week at home against Kentucky. Lenora Sellers came back last week and played a very solid game at Missouri, making that one fairly competitive, losing by just 9 on the road. And I think this is the week we see him really get it going. Kentucky is just a bad team in the SEC, and I really don't see a reason South Carolina shouldn't be able to blow them out in this spot. Their backs are against the wall now for the remainder of the season, and they're at home in a night game with a rowdy environment and an even healthier Sellers now. The O-line needs to block, but the defense should step up and up against a bad Kentucky offense. At least enough to cover, so give me a 27-17 final. Next is Marshall at Louisiana. Like I said last week, Louisiana cannot throw the football. They lost on the road to Eastern Michigan last week because of it, like I predicted, and it was actually their best passing week of the season, but Daniel Beal still threw 2 picks and relied on big chunk plays against a terrible defense. But on the bright side this week, I genuinely feel like Louisiana is a better football team than Marshall, and this could be a good spot for them coming off a road loss. Marshall took on an even worse Middle Tennessee team last week and was trailing in the third before scoring 21 straight to win that game. Carlos Del Rio Wilson does look solid, but I like Louisiana to bounce back here, 24-20. Louisiana Tech is sneaky good this year. They just handled a decent Southern Miss team a week after obliterating New Mexico State and losing to LSU by 2 scores. They'll head to UTEP this week, who was getting blown out by ULM before making a comeback to make that score look close. And this La Tech defense is just as stout, if not better. The offense has solid weapons all around, and Blake Baker is playing efficient football. Road games can be tough with these teams, but I think Louisiana Tech has looked good enough with no hiccups to this point to trust them on the road. I'll go 28-21 over UTEP. BYU is now ranked in the top 25 as they head to Colorado this week. The Cougar defense is absolutely dominant so far, and the offense has gotten it done so far despite having a true freshman quarterback. Colorado looked better last week, but Wyoming is a completely different level team than BYU. These two teams are different from last year by a lot, but they matched up in the Alamo Bowl, and it was a blowout. That defense is pretty similar, and I just don't believe in Salter to score consistently enough to hang within a touchdown all game. And Colorado's defense has given up some plays to lesser offenses than BYU's got. So I'll take the Cougars on the road Saturday night, 31-21. That's it for my Week 5 picks. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below on any of these games. And as always, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
BARK Radio.